are the only person who can call this off. Call it off. The election is over. Call it off.
Hi again, everyone. It's 5 o'clock in the East. You are the only person who can call this off. That was a Republican congressman. His name's Mike Gallagher. He's from Wisconsin. And that was from January 6, 2021, in a tweet he put out while the Capitol insurrection was well underway. And we recently heard from a rioter himself in his own words, who confirmed exactly what Gallagher says there. At the 1-6 Select Committee's hearing last week, rioter Stephen Ayers said that once Trump tweeted out asking his supporters to leave, well, lo and behold, Ayers left, went home. But we know that that tweet from the president was hours and hours and hours in the making, 3+ hours to be exact. It is those 187 minutes that will be the focus of this week's public hearing by the Select Committee, Thursday in prime time. It will detail how Trump did nothing at all to call off the angry mob of his supporters as they breached the Capitol, injured, in some instances maimed, more than 140 police officers, sought to overturn an official proceeding, and threatened the lives of elected officials, including his own vice president. Here's what Liz Cheney, the vice chair of the committee, told us to expect.
You will hear that Donald Trump never picked up the phone that day to order his administration to help. This is not ambiguous. He did not call the military. His Secretary of Defense received no order. He did not call his Attorney General. He did not talk to the Department of Homeland Security. Mike Pence did all of those things. Donald Trump did not. We will walk through the events of January 6th next week, minute by minute.
As we wait to see exactly what new evidence and testimony and information the committee will reveal to the public, let's take a look at what we already know about what the ex-president did during those critical 187 minutes. Just days after the insurrection, the Washington Post did reporting that reveals that the man who was, in the words of other Republicans, the one and only person who could call it all off, was instead sitting in front of the boob tube, transfixed by what he was saying. Quote, as senators and House members trapped inside the U.S. Capitol on Wednesday begged for immediate help during the siege, they struggled to get through to the president, who, safely ensconced in the West Wing, was too busy watching fiery TV images of the crisis unfolding around them to act or even bother to hear their pleas. Quote, it took him a while to appreciate the gravity of the situation, Lindsey Graham said. Quote, the president saw these people as allies in his journey and sympathetic to the idea that the election was stolen. Meanwhile, congressmen and women in the Capitol that day were traumatized, hiding under their desks in the upper deck of the House chamber, putting on their gas masks, taking off their congressional pins in order to not be recognized as members, fearing for their lives. Yet, the ex-president sat there watching it on TV, watching it all take place, according to former White House Press Secretary Stephanie Grisham, gleefully. We heard it, too, from former aide Cassidy Hutchinson, that the ex-president did not want to do anything to stop or quell what he was watching because he liked it. Take a look at what was on TV that day, what he was watching, and picture the ex-president, the only one who can stop it, doing nothing.
We just saw protesters walking through Statuary Hall.
When you breach that, you haven't gone through security, and you got to imagine that that is making a lot of the Capitol Police and other folks inside the Capitol right now very, very uncomfortable and very nervous.
The rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president? He said, no, he wants to be alone right now. Still looking at his phone.
And then you saw some sort of pepper spray back in that direction. You can see, obviously, yeah, it's pretty contentious right now.
I know. And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, the rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now. And Mark looked up at him and said, he doesn't want to do anything, Pat.
Here's an email from our producer, Haley Talbot, inside the House chamber. We are told to sit and stay calm and wait for Capitol Police to come. Be prepared to get under chairs if necessary. Verify every door is locked, someone yelled. There is tear gas in the rotunda and grabbing masks under seats, and be prepared to put it on. So the members have masks available to them. Everyone is freaking out.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, You heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it.
What a tremendously sad day across our country. We should make no mistake. These are rioters. These are insurrectionists. The whole world is watching this. The whole world is now able to see what has happened to the U.S. Capitol.
It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Ashley Parker is here. We're thrilled that she has just been named senior national political correspondent. See, it's the first time she's here, and I screwed up at the Washington Post. Lucky for us, she's also an MSNBC political analyst. Also joining us, Hugo Lowell, congressional reporter at The Guardian. And our friend Jason Johnson's here, politics and journalism professor at Morgan State University, host of A Word with Jason Johnson, the podcast, also an MSNBC contributor. Ashley Parker, I'll start with you. Congrats on your new role. You had the byline, I think, on the first piece of reporting about Trump sitting and watching TV, transfixed, I think was your reporting shortly after the insurrection. That feels as though it's a fact that has only been corroborated with every insider that has testified to this committee and will feature prominently Thursday night.
That's right. I mean, immediately after the insurrection, we knew as reporters that that was the story we wanted to try to get to the bottom of. What was then President Trump, this sort of singular feature, doing, or in many ways, as the case turned out, not doing during that period between when the Capitol was first breached and when he finally sent out a tweet calling off his supporters. And as we've seen initially with our reporting and then with some of these tell-all books and people who have become disillusioned. And now, of course, with the committee, which has something that we wish we had, but we don't, which is subpoena power, we're getting a much clearer and more granular look at the fact that Trump understood what was going on, that he was being urged by a number of people in his orbit who were there physically in front of him, who were calling in, trying to get him to basically do anything to end the violence at the U.S. Capitol, and that he was really resistant for a very long period.
You know, Hugo, I remember pastoring people like Ashley and Jonathan Swan and other reporters from the earliest days after 1/6 with this question that maybe you have an answer to. Who was America's commander-in-chief on January 6th? It's clear the committee is going to try to answer that Thursday night.
Well, I think as it turned out, the person who managed to get the National Guard to come in or to have some sort of law enforcement response ended up being the vice president, stuck in that loading dock down in the basement of the Senate side. He was calling in, trying to figure out some sort of response because the actual commander-in-chief was, derelict in his duty. And I think that's what the Select Committee really wants to stress the American people at that hearing Thursday. I mean, I think they're trying to show that he was in the dining room watching TV, that the First Lady was also nowhere to be found. Stephanie Grisham talking about how she was trying to text the First Lady to issue some sort of statement. And, while she was busy photographing rugs in the residence, she just texted back no. And I think the committee really wants to show that the former president was nowhere to be found in the most critical moments during the insurrection.
Jason, I started asking on that day other members what they thought was going to happen. And I was shocked by the kinds of things they said. It was a secret to absolutely no one that there was a very high likelihood of violence. Let me show you some of those conversations starting on January 6th.
As a member, I called my husband last night and I told him that I was coming into work today, but that should anything happen, I let him know where my will and last testament was located in the event that we needed it.
I knew that something was going to go down. I didn't know what, but I wore my tennis shoes on Wednesday because I knew, just based on what I know as a layperson, reading and knowing nothing about security, really, although I've been in many dangerous situations, I knew something was going to happen.
Fortunately, we took the decision to keep them out of the Capitol that day. And so thank God, in the midst of worrying about so many things, I wasn't worried about, my poor staff, as so many were, hiding under desks or in closets as the mob broke down doors.
In some ways, this was the earliest evidence of intent, that all these members knew before they walked in that Trump intended to bring violence. And it isn't even the obstructing of the official piece of it, which is not counting the votes. The vice president's role is purely ceremonial. It was the violence. They all knew that there would be violence.
Nicole, they all knew there was going to be violence. We heard reports from members of Congress saying we saw weird tours with Republican members of Congress beforehand. Every single element of this shows intent and shows that it's exactly what Donald Trump wanted. Like, if this was like a high school basketball game, right, where like the one coach was saying we're going to kill the other team because they lost on a last-second shot, and there's a bunch of kids fighting in the playground afterwards, we would know it's the coach, right? It's not complicated. It's the guy in the red uniform with the whistle, right? So we've always known that this is what Donald Trump wanted. What's been sort of disturbing to me, and what I know is going to leave me even more enraged after Thursday, is this idea of, with it being so ridiculously obvious to everyone. And also, Nicole, now we're finding out that additional information about that day and collusion perhaps by the Secret Service has magically disappeared, that no one has yet been held accountable. Like, the idea that Trump was behind the violence has always been the most obvious element of this, above and beyond even the collusion within members of Congress.
And all of it sort of comes to its, I guess we're calling it season finale or mid-season finale Thursday night for the 1-6 committee, which has taken the burden of what a lot of people in America feel that Jason's articulating, Ashley. Let me go through the timeline, because they're going to be reliving the 187 minutes. We tried to put some of this together. The joint session starts at 1:05. Trump gets back from that rally on the Ellipse. We know he wanted to be there, but the Secret Service prevails, and he goes back to the White House by 1:19. At 1:50, a riot is declared officially by the D.C. police commander. Right before 2 o'clock, 1:59, that was the image we showed you at the top. Rioters have reached the Capitol windows and doors to try to get inside. 2:05, the first fatality in the Capitol insurrection of January 6, 2021 happens. It's Kevin Greason, a Trump supporter from Alabama. He has a heart attack. At 2:13, they rush Pence out. I think that's when everyone realized that there was a real security threat to the vice president of the United States. And yet, 11 minutes later, Trump tweeted, quote, "Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution." I'm going to stop here for now. But that chunk of time, 1 hour and about 20 minutes, Ashley, is perhaps the most incriminating part of the timeline.
It's all pretty incriminating, Nicole, in part because we know because we and others have reported it, but we also just know about Trump, which is that he is someone who is glued to the television. So as soon as anything started being shown on TV, he was watching, he was taking it in, and we were told, maybe not quite pleased, but he liked the fact, again, if you're being charitable, people around him will claim not the violence, but he certainly liked the fact that his supporters were fighting on his behalf. He did not have the reaction that much of the rest of the country did, which was watching in shock and horror and being appalled. I mean, I remember having covered Congress. You can't go in to the speaker's lobby as a woman if your shoulders aren't covered, if you're wearing the wrong outfit. And so to see that area being overrun and the security procedures, everyone was absolutely stunned and aghast, and he was taking it in and at least initially kind of enjoying it.
There's been no evidence entered into the public arena that he ever stopped enjoying it, has there, Ashley?
Not in the public arena. I will say there are people around him who said he did not enjoy the violence, but no, there's been nothing that we have seen from this committee or that people have really come out and said that goes against this idea that at every turn, initially he liked the fervor of his supporters, and even when he realized he potentially had a problem on his hands, which again was a deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol, that he had to be browbeaten and nudged and urged and almost forced to do the absolute bare minimum, which was to begrudgingly call off his supporters.
And Hugo, he did that with this tweet. After attacking Mike Pence, who has been evacuated 11 minutes earlier, he asked his supporters to support Capitol Police and law enforcement, who they were maiming with spears and bear spray. He tells his supporters to stay peaceful at 2:38, over an hour and a half in. Ashley Babbitt dies at 2:44. His supporter, writer Paul Hodgkins, enters the Senate chamber at 3 o'clock. And then at 4:17, he tweets a video and he says to his supporters, quote, "We love you. You are very special." What do you make of what the committee has to work with Thursday night?
Well, through our reporting and others' reporting, we know that that tweet that was sent wasn't the initial draft. It was a very watered down draft. And initially, his aides wanted Trump to tweet, for them to leave the Capitol much sooner and in more forceful language. But ultimately, the message that went out late in the evening around, or late in the afternoon around 4 p.m. was a kind of distilled down version of that directive. And I think that's really important, right? I mean, if you try and think of this from Trump's point of view, he knew by the evening of January 5, according to our reporting, that January 6 was his final opportunity to try and return himself to that White House. He knew that if the congressional certification went ahead and Biden was kind of certified as president, there would be no way back for him. And so he had communicated to Steve Bannon and other people at the Willard War Room that that was what needed to happen. He needed to stop that certification. And so I think investigators on the Select Committee are viewing this as Trump really didn't want that insurrection to stop. And so it was a begrudging and very reluctant tweet that he sent to try and eventually stop at everyone else's insistence.
But Hugo, hasn't the 1-6 committee shown that it really wasn't an opportunity to do what you just said? It really wasn't an opportunity to stop anything, and Trump knew it. He was told by his White House counsel, Pat Cipollone and Eric Hirschman, that it was illegal.
Right, and so I think in Trump's mind, he thought this was like maybe the final opportunity he had. I mean, obviously, all of his advisors around him, all of his sane advisors around him, the White House counsel, his various top advisors in the White House, were telling him that there was no way he could get around this congressional certification. But of course, as we now know, he was listening to Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, and these people were telling him all the way through January 5, all the way through January 6, that it was still possible, and he wanted to cling to that belief.
Jason, and I guess I follow up because what the committee has proven is that Donald Trump, and Liz Cheney made this point pretty artfully, leaving out the word fat, but calling him a 76-year-old guy who had the access to all the best information in the world and not a child. Basically saying he sat on his rear end and willfully ignored the counsel from everybody around him, that what he sought to do on January 6th was illegal, was ill-advised. What he sought to do at DOJ with Jeffrey Clark would lead to a Saturday night massacre, the likes of which would make the actual Saturday night massacre look small. I mean, what the committee has succeeded in doing is showing that the president knew that January 6th was not an opportunity to overturn the election, that was illegal.
Right. Nicole, that's the thing. Like, he already knew, hey, this dude is not working, right? Every piece of documentation, every corrupt crony that he had put in office, even they said, this is a bridge, this is a Chris Christie bridge too far, right? They're just blocked. You can't do it. There's no way you can do this, right? He knew it already. And so January 6th can be seen as nothing but an attempt at a violent overthrow of the United States government. Right. And I think what's important, Nicole, and this is what I'm really fascinated about to see on Thursday. It's like, what on earth else could he have been doing at the time? What was he doing? Like, what else could be more important? We're mad about Uvalde cops for waiting too long to go in and stop a mass shooter where their lives were in danger. But, hey, that's what we expect them to do. This man's job was to protect the country. All he had to do was make a phone call or a tweet, and he wouldn't do it. In fact, he darn near encouraged people to kill his vice president. So that's the part I'm really fascinated. I am curious as to what Republicans have to tell themselves at night before they go to bed, having survived last year, to tell themselves that made it okay that for hundreds of minutes, this man did nothing to protect the country as he attempted to slaughter every member of Congress.
I mean, I guess actually what they have to tell themselves is, I hope I don't run into Kevin McCarthy of January 6th or on all those recorded phone calls with Steve Scalise and Liz Cheney. There we've heard that he thought that impeachment would take too long, as with the 25th Amendment. What are we going to do with this guy? I want to ask you, Ashley, with all of your knowledge of the White House, to tell us what we should expect to hear from the two live witnesses, Mr. Pottinger and Sarah Matthews.
Sure. So Sarah Matthews was a young press assistant. So first I should say they both had full visibility in the sense that they were at the White House and in the West Wing in the run-up and on that day. So Sarah Matthews, young press assistant, who could certainly speak to the efforts to get then President Trump to send out a tweet and would potentially have visibility into what the initial draft that he did not want to send out, why he didn't want to send out the tweets, why it took so long, who was urging him to do what, and what he was saying in response. And so that would be her visibility. And then Matt Pottinger, I think it's very briefly important to note that he is someone who until this was better known for being one of the first people in the Trump White House to sound the alarms on coronavirus and to actually take it seriously. He was in the West Wing wearing masks before anyone else in the country really knew that this was coming from China. So he's someone who has credibility as a truth teller, just to set the stage. And he, I believe, is someone who was specifically there around 3 p.m. in that timeline you just laid out, going in and speaking to Mark Meadows and saying, the National Guard isn't there. They are desperately trying to get the National Guard there. We need to send the National Guard. What can we do to send it? And that was another dynamic that was happening. There were people. The D.C. mayor's office went through Kellyanne Conway to try to get to Trump, to try to get him to send in the National Guard. So that would be one fascinating area where Matt Pottinger has a lot of visibility.
Ashley Parker and Hugo Lowell, thank you for your reporting on this incredible chapter, and thank you for starting us off this hour. Jason sticks around.